The beacons are lit, and Gondor calls for aid. Will you join?
The beacons are lit!
Aid. Will you join the 40k Rohirrim to take the fight for Middle Earth to the stars and take on all new foes that beset the realms of man? I'm sure you guys have seen the posts over the last few weeks as I've been beginning to build out my successor chapter and define exactly what I want it to be, a lot with you guys' help, which has been awesome. Thank you guys. But it also kind of got me thinking, what if I took fantasy armies and transported them into 40k? What would they look like? How would they act? How would their natures actually fit into Warhammer 40k? And that led us to this list. I call it the Untitled Chapter, which is the original name for the Rohirrim in Lord of the Rings lore. But it was actually a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. The Untitled Chapter was a lot of fun. It was actually inspired by the new Lord of the Rings movie, which was okay. I wasn't a huge fan of it, but I am a big fan of Lord of the Rings in general. And I've seen a lot more Lord of the Rings content lately, and it kind of inspired me to run with this story. The Rohirrim were always one of my favorite factions. The others were always the dwarves when it comes to Lord of the Rings. But the dwarves were too easy. And with all of the fun stuff going on with the Rohirrim, I wanted to actually bring it to life. So here's your first look at the Untitled chapter right here. And let's talk about who they are, where they came from, and what type of things inspired them to really take root in the Warhammer 40k universe. The Untitled chapter is a successor chapter of the White Scars. That is a pretty obvious choice. They are not from Chigoris, though. And because of that, they do not have the Asian features. They are from a much distant world that the White Scars were forced to pull from during one of their many strikes out into the edges of the universe. They're located in the Kairos sector of the Segmentum Pacificus, very far out from everything, and they follow kind of the same White Scars need to move and travel and sweep through this sector in a constant hunt for a lot of things that are very, very dangerous. They originally pulled here because of a horde of orcs that were starting to assemble, as well as hunting down some Drukhari who had been raiding this area pretty heavily. And the Erlingus took it up upon themselves to drive out these two forces and secure this segmentum from all attacks. Their new homeworld, Kalinardhome, is near the center of this segmentum, and they use it as a base of operations to send scout fleets out to go hunt for these main threats and fight for everything that they've got going on. Now, they do have a couple allies in the area. They have become very good friends with a couple of the Imperial Army units in the area, but more importantly, they become really good friends with the Iron Snakes chapter and have a very similar agreement with the Iron Snakes as Gondor and Rohan had in Lord of the Rings. They are very, very good at coming to each other's aid quickly and always supporting each other when that's needed. Even though the Iron Snakes and the Erlingus are from vastly different gene stocks, they've somehow managed to form this relationship of mutual benefit and protection. As you can see here, their color scheme is a dark green and gold, very similar to the Rohirrim. They also have a lot of browns, a lot of leather and stuff like that they mix into their color scheme as well, to make sure you still kind of get that feel of horses and leather and that medieval touch without having to go overboard and mock things up too heavily. Now, the Rohirrim typically have a very early Celtic feel to them in their iconography and culture, and the Untitled chapter does as well. So you'll see a lot of things like the Tree of Life and Celtic knots, and most importantly, the stallion head, which is their symbol. The gold stallion head is the symbol of the Untitled, just like it is the Rohirrim. And it's always emblazoned on green. So you'll see a lot of this throughout their iconography and their culture. And they do have a very strong sense of family and strong sense of culture, but they also have zero mercy if you cross them. And that goes both for orcs and Drukhari, as well as heretics, or even people who push the Erdlingus a little too far, Imperial Guard who refuse to cooperate. They can be very brutal if the time comes for it. They're not great, but they do strive to do things well. Tactically, they're very much a speed chapter. They do take a lot of the White Scars bikes and things like that, but they are also a blade heavy chapter, just like the third company of the White Scars. There's a lot of Blade Guard and Blade Guard Ancients mixed in there that are used to hold territory after the bikes get in and clean it out. And that's kind of the way they tend to work. You have this quick strike, and then the leftovers are cleaned up by the most skilled swordsmen who hold the area after the bikes have swept through. So now that we've talked a little bit about the chapter itself, let's talk about the list I would build if I was going to be building this in a 2,000 point army. Now that you guys have a little bit of a background on what this chapter is and what they're like, we need to get into the actual list and what they look like on the battlefield based off a 2,000 point army list. So for this list, we're going to use a captain, and he is going to have his Storm Shield with him. So Captain with Storm Shield is a pretty common one. You can source that pretty much at any LGS, Warhammer.com, Wargame Portal, Amazon, and we'll get into that when we get into the list, the actual cost of the list. But he's the pretty easy to find captain. A lot of times they're not actually commonly used. They were just picked up in a box set. So you usually find them secondhand very easily as well. But for this list, he'll do a good job of being a staple and kind of a anchor point for the list. Next, we're going to have 2 Blade Guard Ancients as well. These Blade Guard Ancients are going to be very, very common in this list to kind of serve as seconds to the captain, and are the most skilled swordsmen who are trained at holding backlines, shield walls, that kind of stuff. So with those 2, obviously we do need some bike characters as well. So I brought in 3 chaplains on bikes. Chaplains on bikes with outriders are so nice. One of my regrets with my White Scars list is I didn't actually do more than 1 chaplain on bike. At the time, Captain on Bike was still a thing, because I started in about mid 9th edition, so he hadn't been legend yet. But now, I'm probably going to have to redo my White Scars. They were my first army, so not the cleanest look. But eventually I'll probably add at least 1 more chaplain on bike to make them run a little bit smoother, or maybe play my captain on bike as a chaplain on bike to make it legal. But they're another staple that allows for a lot of free flow and control and buffing of the actual Outriders units. So now let's talk about the core of the list, which is obviously going to be Blade Guard. I have 5 3-man units. I'll probably break those into 2 bigger, at least 2 bigger bricks, and then 1 smaller brick. Put the 2 bigger bricks with the Blade Guard Ancients and a smaller brick with the captain to give some nice mobility there. I'd also would suggest 6 boxes of Outriders. So I would probably go 3 6-man blocks of Outriders so that you can pair the 3 chaplains on bike with them. If you want to break that up more, you can, but that's the way I see it, especially if we're talking Rohirrim strategy. Now, to finish this list off, we do need a little bit more anti-tank. So I went with 1 of each of the Stormstrike speeders, the Hellstrike, the Hammer Strike, and the Thunderstrike, just to give us a little bit more punch and give us something to deal with tanks when they do come up, or if we're unfortunate enough to hit knights. This type of mob won't be the best against knights, but I can see them having a lot of these speeders as well. It does fit with the Rohirrim style of fighting. On top of that, if we take the more Celtic look at it, The Celts also used a lot of war chariots, so bringing that aspect into these speeders as well could be a lot of fun, and could give us some really cool modeling and kit bashing we could do there. But that makes up the bulk of it. I do also throw in 2 impulsors so that we can transport our blade guard around a little bit quicker. But other than that, I would look at maybe using GW's Rohirrim accessories pack that you can pick up. It's a good addition and may give you a little bit more flair and cultural aesthetic to shift them away from the White Scars or just standard Space Marine looks. As you can tell, I didn't include any specific White Scars characters or accessory kits because they carry far too much to the Mongol side, whereas we're wanting to lean far more to the Celt side. So if you can't find that, maybe picking up some Space Wolf stuff might help as well to give you that kind of feel, because the Rohirrim do have a lot more axes, but they do heavily use lances as well. So finding those little tweaks you can do and kit bashing you can do will drastically improve the look and feel of your army as well. So next, let's talk about the actual cost of the army and what it'll take to build, and then we'll actually dive into the simple things like how to paint it and how to use it on the tabletop. Now that we know what the army is going to look like, let's talk about how much it's going to cost to build. I will warn you, this is not going to be a cheap army to build if you do try and build it one box at a time. There's a lot of ways to circumvent this. There's a Space Marine box that was not very popular at their Space Marine or the launch of Space Marines in early 10th edition. That has a lot of Outriders. You can pick up the Chigoris box from 9th edition as well that has a lot of these units. You can also look at other types of bundles and boxes, but most importantly, the Blade Guard Ancients. Currently, they were merged into the Untitled Chapter box, which means you have to buy the entire box to get them, and you're going to have to buy 2 boxes to get the 2 Blade Guard Ancients. Now, their build and mold haven't changed at all, from what I can tell, so you should be able to pick them up pretty cheap secondhand. And that's the direction I would recommend going, because that box alone is $168 at retail. And even at the value purchasers, it's going to run you about $142.80. So I'd be careful with that and try and look at any of your either value retailers or secondhand market for those Blade Guard Ancients to help combat that cost. Because if you don't, at full retail prices, it's going to cost $1,782. This is probably the most expensive list I've built. There may be one that's higher that we have not covered yet, but it's not going to be cheap. And even if you go with the value route, that I'm going to talk about here, it's a 1 box, 1 unit buy. I try to do that because value boxes can't be guaranteed for a long time. So I'm trying to keep this as close to correct as possible over time. And I used Amazon and Wargame Portal because those are the 2 that I find the best deals on that aren't secondhand purchases like eBay. But that value cost is going to cost you $1,501.95. So still not cheap. It's still quite expensive. It's going to run you about the same as the White Scars list did at full retail. But like I said, value boxes, things like that, there should still be several available through your LGS, Amazon, or secondhand locations as well to fill out this list in a way that isn't going to hit your wallet anywhere near as hard, and I would definitely recommend doing that. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there is a Lord of the Rings war game as well. So to make a fluffy list, I went and poached some units from there. It actually saved us some money. So the Blade Guard Ancients that I talked about earlier were ones that I actually poached I believe they were a Rohirrim captain on foot, and they were only $83 instead of the $150 that the combo box had. They're a higher quality resin, more Forge World style character. There's a few others that we also went with, like the Chaplain on Bike. There was also, they had a 3-man foot soldier squad that would be pretty easy proxy for Blade Guard as well. So that actually saved us a fair amount of money, dropped us all the way down to $1,207.50. So I would definitely recommend looking at that direction to maybe save a little bit more money and give us a really cool aesthetic. My one concern is that the scaling won't be right. I haven't actually seen the Lord of the Rings minis next to a Space Marine, so I don't know if they're going to be closer to guard size instead of Space Marine size. So that may be the one thing to keep in mind just in case. But now that we've talked cost, we've talked army composition, let's talk painting, modeling, and kit bashing. And we'll dive into that next. Now that we've talked about cost and things like that, let's talk about how you're going to want to paint these and mock them up to really give you as close a feel to the Rohirrim as you can while still being Space Marines. Now, the first thing we want to talk about is the color scheme. I went with a very dark green armor, almost a Caliban green, or a Monument Hobby's dark green, or a black green, I think is the actual official name for it. It's a really, really good dark forest green tone that really does pull in that Rohirrim color scheme that we see a lot in Lord of the Rings. Now you're going to want to accent that with a lot of gold or bronze. I would tend to lean a little bit more bronze just because it once again fits. And I even went so far as to bronze the main section of the helmet and then leave the faceplate in green. It gives it a really, really cool feel. If you wanted to invert that and just leave the helmet green and do the crest bronze as well, you could. Whatever you feel will look the best and will be the easiest to paint is definitely the direction I would go. Now, I do accent with quite a bit of brown as well, because leather and leather armor and stuff like that is very common with the Rohirrim. On top of that, I do a lot of brown on their bike to kind of faux represent the horses and give it a little bit more of that classic feel. I did include a green stripe on here just to make it so it's not just a giant brown mess. And then I accented with quite a bit of bronze, and I went with a little bit more gunmetal to make sure it stayed in that slightly darker feel. And basing wise, you're going to want to base like a grassland as well. So paint it brown, add dirt and grass to it to make it look like your army's racing through the grasslands of Rohan. It's a pretty simple basing scheme that shouldn't take too long to do, especially with the right tools. I actually just picked up an Army Painter basing kit recently to help with my new successor chapter as soon as I start painting them. But it really does kind of change the way you look at your actual units. If they're all based and look and feel like they're running through a meadow or fighting on the grasslands of Rohan, it helps it stay very true to the lore accuracy as well when it comes to Rohirrim. I hope you guys have enjoyed this twist on my lore accurate videos, and I hope you guys might enjoy more of these videos as well, where we have a little bit of fun and build a successor chapter out of one of your favorite armies in fantasy or science fiction. I already have a few planned that we're going to scatter throughout the lore accurate lists now that we're not doing the book reviews separately. And if you have any other suggestions, let me know in the comments below. And I haven't actually said this yet, but don't forget to like and subscribe. It's been a lot of fun, and if you ring this little bell, you'll be able to find out which army we're doing next after our lore accurate video next week, which is actually going to be the Ultramarines. We'll be doing a lore accurate list based on Space Marine 2 and all of the fight scenes and the company deployments that we see throughout those videos, or throughout the cutscenes and in the video game. So I will see you guys next week.